Hi there, it's Denise Eckert, and I love coming on here and sharing different ideas and techniques to help you lower your stress or to make a difference in your life. And today we're going to talk about ADHD. And today's guest is Sarah Callaghan, and she's a holistic counselor, ADHD educator, and founder of Unmasking Together. As a neurodivergent mother and a passionate advocate, she offers counseling and webinars to help neurodivergent adults understand their brain and enhance their strengths. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having me, Denise. I really appreciate it.
Now, what inspired you to work with people with ADHD and helping them understand their brain?
Yeah, look, it was actually because I was already working as a counselor, as a holistic counselor, and I took some time off when I had my second kid. And when I came back, all my clients came back post maternity leave and they were like, hey, I got diagnosed with ADHD, just like you suggested I go and look at while you had your time off. And then suddenly I was like, oh, so all of my clients already they are neurodivergent, they have ADHD and they want to understand it more. And then I was just like, I already have a brain with ADHD and I want to understand myself better too. So why not? Let's learn more about it. Let's specialize. And I've been doing that for a couple of years now and it's been fantastic.
So, Sarah, what exactly is ADHD?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's hard to know, right? Because
Mhm.
I feel like society can tell you so many things about what it is, but like, really, what is it? I know I grew up for over 20 years knowing I had it, but not knowing anything about it. Like I had a lot of people can't relate to my journey because a lot of people are late diagnosed. I was actually diagnosed when I was a kid. And even though I knew I had it, no one ever told me what it meant. My parents didn't know what it meant. We didn't know the differences were or how it would affect me. So in my 20s, that's when I started to learn. And what I know now is that it's a different neurotype, right? It's just a different setup for the brain. An ADHD brain will have some different brain connectivity, some different brain structure, and some different neurochemistry. So it means that some neurotransmitters like dopamine, which is like our reward hormone, they work very differently in an ADHD brain. So it can impact every person with ADHD is going to have a unique experience. I'm not going to suggest that every ADHD brain is the same. Like, I think there are a lot of ways that ADHDs can relate to one another, but everyone's still going to have their own unique experience with it. But it can impact, it mostly impacts one part of our brain, which is called our prefrontal cortex. And we often call this it's responsible for our executive functioning. So it's like the CEO of our brain. It's in charge of the executive functions that a CEO would be in charge of in a business. It's in charge of the planning, the organization, the emotional regulation, the like conflict resolution, planning, prioritization, all those kinds of things. But for a prefrontal cortex to be able to complete these functions, it's like in the center and it sends out little messages to the rest of the brain being like, oh, we need to complete this and we need to do this and we need to do this. So we can complete all these functions in the brain. But to do that, it needs neurotransmitters to get the messages out. They're like our little messengers. And unfortunately, in an ADHD brain, from what scientists can tell, our brains just don't make as much of it in the first place. And then the neurotransmitters, when they're on their travels, our brain likes to clean it up before it's finished its job, essentially. So even the dopamine that is sent out to complete these functions on its way to its destination, we have these little cleaners in our brain, which I can't remember the technical term for, but I call them the cleaners for my own sake. And they like to clean up the dopamine before they've even reached their destination. So we're not only starting off with not that much, but then the ones that are sent off, they're not getting to their destinations. So we actually need to do way more supports to be able to increase our dopamine, to be able to get even a slight similar satisfaction to complete these tasks like a neurotypical brain would. We just don't start off with the same neurotransmitters as everyone else, which is super unfortunate. But I am glad that at least we're in a time now where education is out there and we can learn these things. And, we can probably understand a little bit better now why ADHD brains need the support systems that they do, because we have a dysregulated dopamine system, which means it can be hard for us to concentrate, or sometimes we can get super duper concentrated on things that our brain finds really fun. Like it's a dysregulated attention system, not necessarily we can't concentrate, but our brain does get dysregulated with this attention. And then there's other things that can come up from it. A lot of people would relate to the hyperactivity side of it. The hyperactivity can come out in those physical ways that we stereotypically might relate ADHD to, but it can also come out as cognitive hyperactivity, which I think a lot of women would relate to with ADHD, because they may not physically feel like they're hyperactive and relate to that stereotype of the little boy who bounces off the walls and has ADHD. But they may relate to a lot of women with ADHD where they have 1,000 miles a minute and they always have 20 tabs open and they can never stop thinking. And it's just always so busy in their brain. That is a presentation of ADHD that's anyone can experience, but I know a lot of women experience this, the cognitive hyperactivity. Hopefully that told you a bit about ADHD. I don't think I gave you its term, though it is a neurodevelopmental condition, but that's probably, I think that's as good of a introduction I can give to you.
What are the key differences for women with ADHD compared to men?
It's funny, I actually think a lot of the key differences, I'm not even quite certain if, do you know the whole difference between nature and nurture?
Not really.
Okay, so the difference is, say, if it's a nature thing, we're born with it, that's how it is. Are women and men born with ADHD brains? Are women actually given like a very different type of ADHD from men? Or is it that we have similar types of ADHD and then we're brought up in a society which treats boys and girls very differently? So therefore, the ADHD ends up presenting differently, which personally, I think it's that. I think it's the nature side of things. Like girls are raised to be good girls and we're praised on being able to sit still and be quiet and be kind and be helpful and be obedient and don't butt in and don't talk over people and don't have too many opinions. There's so many things that we're taught how to do as a kid. And I think boys, they were given more leniency to be boys. Like boys will be boys. Oh, he runs, he plays, he hits, he fights, he's silly. Oh, it's just like a funny thing for a boy to release those physical presentations of hyperactivity that come up from ADHD. It was brushed over. It was like, boys can do whatever they want. But girls, they weren't a good girl if they did those things. If they were doing all of those things, something was like, I hate saying something was wrong with them because they couldn't follow suit like the other girls could. So I think because of this pressure that girls grow up with, they end up internalizing their ADHD. Like I think that's why the cognitive hyperactivity happens more. If I can't physically release my hyperactivity, it will be all in my brain, like buzzing all the time. But if I give myself the allowance and freedom to move my body as much as I want and like wiggle and jiggle and scribble on notepads and do all these things, it's actually much easier for me to concentrate. There's fewer streams of thought happening in my brain if I allow myself to get my hyperactivity out. But when we grow up in a society that doesn't give that same allowance to girls to wriggle and jiggle and all of that, I think it creates very busy brains, because I think girls have been conditioned to work harder to mask their ADHD, to hide it, because common ADHD traits aren't seen as being a good girl. I think that's why there's a difference between the female presentation and the male presentation. I think women are brought up and they learn how to mask it so much harder. And that's why we see so much more commonly that girls are diagnosed late, because they work much harder to mask it so they can be the good girl and receive praise. Yeah.
I agree
unfortunately.
with
But I
that
don't
so much
think,
because as a girl,
mm,
it's stop fidgeting and this and that. As a girl, you're
yeah,
supposed to sit there and look pretty. And
yes,
as you said, the boys are out there playing and doing what have you. But yeah, as a girl, it's you have to sit there and look pretty.
yeah, there's a lot more pressure,
No
unfortunately.
fidgeting.
And imagine if that's someone's natural rhythm. That's how their nervous system naturally operates, how their brain naturally operates, but they're continuously their whole life working super duper hard to hide it for all their might, because on some subconscious level, they're like, if I let this part out, I'm not going to be loved. That's so hard. That's so rough. And so many women, because I understand and I relate, like they work so hard to hide this part of them. It also means they're so much more likely to develop anxiety alongside of this, depression alongside of this, because their ADHD is shamed, it's unmanaged, and it doesn't get the support it needs. Like it's super rough. But yeah, so I think, and no, from studies, it's even more common for women to have these co-occurring conditions due to that kind of trauma they go through, not being able to feel understood, accepted, or supported with the ADHD in the first place.
I remember myself growing up, and I'm a little bit older, but you were considered a bad girl. What was that? Like you're just the bad girl. And it was funny. I have to share this
Exactly.
with you. Like in grade 3, I was in a portable for that year, and they actually the teacher made a little cubby hole, and I had a little desk in there so I wouldn't disrupt the class. And to be honest with you, I loved it because I could do my
Yeah,
work in the main
totally.
area. And then once I was finished my work, because I was always fast, I would go to the other area and I had all these little projects on the go. So she was amazing. She,
That's
yeah, rather than having me
awesome.
to sit there and disrupt the rest of the class, which is what I normally did,
Yeah,
she
same.
worked with it. And you know what? She
Yeah.
probably didn't know what she was working with because it was not a thing in those days. It was not a thing.
No. But it's funny because it does help now having language. It gives us a better, it can give us a little list or a map or a road guide to be like, how can we support this person? But a reasonable person shouldn't need the label to be able to figure out how to support a kid. Like, you should be able to look at the kid and go, okay, they're having trouble concentrating. Maybe they could do well with being in an environment where their sole focus is this one thing and they have the freedom to just focus on that. And then my other kids in the class won't be distracted by her. You didn't need any labels for that. But I mean, it does really help now because instead of her going through like a trial and error period, I'm sure, trying to figure out what would work for you, now there's like a little list being like, try this or this.
And honestly, after that, I sat a lot of time in the hall, so it was better than being in the hall. Now,
Yeah.
why are there so many women going undiagnosed? Or is this something that we really need to get diagnosed?
Oh, it really depends on the person. It depends on how ADHD is affecting your life, right? If a person feels like they didn't grow up partially masking it and it didn't create anxiety and depression alongside of it, and they have intuitively figured out their systems in their home life and their work life on how to support it along the way, then like, no, it's not absolutely necessary you go and fork out thousands of dollars to get a diagnosis. But I would still recommend to the person that they get educated on their brain so they can not just have their intuitive systems, but some guidance as well. Like I still would recommend they get educated and learn about the thing. But unless on the flip side, I guess there are a lot of circumstances where I would say, yeah, totally go for it because it's so worth it. Like it's really valuable getting diagnosed. And I think most of the time, if you are going undiagnosed, you're probably already living with a lot of consequences or fallout or side effects of ADHD when it goes unmanaged. Like anxiety and depression are two of those big ones, I would say, for like co-occurring conditions when it goes unmanaged. But also like when ADHD isn't diagnosed or goes unmanaged, people can really struggle with emotional regulation. They can struggle in their relationships, and they can struggle financially and in their work life. Actually, they can struggle in every area of their life. ADHD doesn't just impact us sitting in a classroom and focusing on a teacher. It actually impacts all areas of life. But I think if it is impacting any area of your life on a regular basis, then yes, I would go and get educated and get diagnosed, which are two different things in this current climate. Like, getting diagnosed does not necessarily mean a psychologist is going to sit you down and tell you all about it. That's a separate process, and people can just do that process if they want. If they get it, they're like, okay, no, I know that's my brain, I'm going to come over here. But then you have medical professionals to help you with medication sides of things, which I would also recommend for anyone with ADHD.
Are there different things that would trigger it to get worse, or
stress massively, mental load, and sleep? So a very common journey timeline that women are taking, right, in this current climate where we have the awareness and the education and the diagnostic tools to be able to diagnose people, in comparison to just 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years ago, we didn't have that same awareness, education, diagnostic tools, right? So now a very common thing that is happening is that women are growing up being undiagnosed, like chugging along, and they're experiencing all the side effects and the fallout of not having diagnosed ADHD. It'll get worse for them after they get married, move in with someone, or have a kid. Especially the have a kid part, because the mental load increases tenfold. That's how a household is run. Here you go, you move in with someone, here's the mental load. You marry someone, here's the mental load. Here's a kid, here's the mental load. Like, it is put on the women in this subconscious way to carry everything that is running a household. And the more we're carrying in our minds, the more effort there is for our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning. That's what they're in charge of. Our CEO is in charge of managing life. And so when you increase the workload, the brain's going to struggle even more. It's, hang on, I didn't have the dopamine, the capacity, the resources to be able to complete the work that we did have on our plates. And now I need to do more for everyone else, for all these other beings. If it didn't already have the support systems in place, it's probably not going to cope very well. And this is when a lot of ADHD women, they will hit a wall. Like, it's can be quite devastating, I think, for a lot of us with ADHD when we go through this. And it's really sad, because if you didn't already know you had ADHD, you didn't have your support systems in place, the shift between what you were dealing with to afterwards, and there's a societal expectation that you should be able to handle it, and then suddenly you feel like you're drowning, it can make you feel like a failure. It can make you feel like you're not good enough, you're not being the good girl. Oh, makes me want to cry, because it's so devastating. There's so many people going through this, and they don't realize, one, it's unfair for the mental load to be so lopsided in the first place, but also secondly, like, you have a brain that needs support systems, that needs more attention and care and understanding than it's currently getting. And you shouldn't be expected to be able to carry all of this. No woman should be expected to carry all of this, but especially a woman with ADHD, this is not for you, babe. Let's find another way. Yeah, it's funny.
Well,
I've
and I
forgotten
find
the
too,
question.
like, I don't have any children, but when you do have a child, your brain is constantly thinking of this child, doesn't matter what you're doing. And it's almost like your brain is working double time
Yes.
all the time. Like, whether they're at school, you're worrying,
Mhm.
okay, did they bring their sweater? Do they have their lunch? Blah, blah, blah. You're constantly thinking about your child's welfare, your child's health. I can see how that can just really hit some women hard, because not only you're struggling with your own brain waves, you're adding someone else's brain waves to your brain waves, really.
Exactly. And like these are all executive functions. Like every single thing you just mentioned there, it's a part of the executive functioning thing. Planning, prioritizing, organization, time management, emotional regulation. So these are all executive functions. And if we imagine that every time we use an executive function, it's going to cost us some dopamine. Like we need to use dopamine to make that executive function happen. Another executive function is being able to switch between tasks. So every time we go from thinking about the kid and what they need to then thinking about ourselves, to thinking about the house, thinking about a partner, thinking about a job, every time we switch, that costs executive functioning. And it's really hard. We can end up using so much of our executive functioning just being in the same room as our family while we're trying to concentrate on replying to an email, because we're jumping from figuring out how to construct this sentence in like a polite and professional manner to the kids last minutes, can I have chips? Can I have this? Can I watch TV? Can I have that? And the switch. And that in itself, like a 5-minute period, could wipe us out because of all the executive functionings that are happening. It's crazy. And so I think a lot of planning is required to be able to intentionally use our dopamine. If I know that's how it's going to be, trying to do one email for 5 minutes, I should really do that email by myself, because otherwise I'll end up spending double the amount out there. Like I think, but I think that's what education can give us, right? It can give us more awareness so we can make more informed choices on how to support ourselves. Like I can make more informed choices on how I can wisely spend my dopamine rather than just trying to do everything all at once.
And that's really important, isn't it? So what are the practices or the things that we can do to help ourselves when we are struggling with ADHD?
What I just mentioned is definitely one of them. Like learning how to spend your dopamine a bit more wisely. If there are any circumstances where you can focus on one task at a time, do that. Block time where it's this is when I'm focusing on the kids' things, or this is when I'm focusing on admin, this is when I'm focusing on the housework, this is when I'm focusing on this, rather than jumping between heaps of different tasks, right? But then also I would highly recommend, there's this thing called a dopamine menu. It was created by Jessica McCabe, who is the creator of How to ADHD. And she's a YouTuber and an author of a book. But I love this tool so much, and I use it in my regular day-to-day life to help me lower my stress, but also with my business. And so what basically you do with this activity is you learn about what activities bring me dopamine, because if we're already lacking dopamine and our brain is struggling to send signals for dopamine, a good way to be able to manage ADHD is how do we get more dopamine? That's something we can do to support ourselves, right? And there's all different ways you can get dopamine. And sometimes it's little tiny things like fun, stimulating music in the background, or sometimes it's me playing with a rock while we talk. For some reason, my brain finds this very fun, playing with a specific rock while we chat. And these are non-distracting ways, like a little bit of music in the background while I'm working on some admin, or playing with a rock while I'm trying to talk. It's what I said to you earlier. It's allowing me to get out some of the hyperactivity almost so that way it's freeing up some of my mental space. But there's heaps of other things. I intentionally use little pieces of chocolate to help me when I do the laundry, because laundry is painful to fold, but I have a system where I have 8 squares of chocolate, and it's like over the course of this laundry basket, I'll eat my chocolate. And it gives me, as I do it, I'm also telling my brain like, hey, it's okay, here's the reward, here's the dopamine, it's okay, keep going, because I'm not going to get dopamine from washing and like folding laundry. Unfortunately, the amount of dopamine I'm going to get from a task like that is already so low because I don't create that much dopamine in the first place. Like I'm not going to get enough from it, and it will end up draining me. So it's like, how can I add dopamine into this? I'll put on Gilmore Girls while I fold the laundry, or while I do admin, put on a good show that doesn't distract you from the task, but stimulates your brain enough that you can focus on the task. And so these are ways we can include sides of dopamine while we do our thing. And creating a dopamine, what you do is you identify these things and you write them down. So that way, anytime you need a side, when you're going to do a task, you read your little list of what are my sides that I could have here? And then you pick a side that'll work for you in that moment. Like even a walking pad under the desk or sitting on an exercise ball. These are sides of dopamine you can have while doing desk work. But then we can also have main meals and desserts and appetizers. There's all these different categories within a dopamine menu, but they're really helpful. If I know I've got 1 hour blocked out in the middle of a work day, and I also know that to be able to complete the second half of my work day, I'm for sure going to need some more dopamine. And where am I going to get it? That might be a good time to go to your dopamine menu and be like, okay, are there any main meals I can fit into my lunch break? And it could be, if a person enjoys running, absolutely run. Like a walk or a dance, like movement can be so helpful for an ADHD brain and with dopamine and serotonin. So if someone was to enjoy dancing, personally, I will put on just one song and tell myself, just dance to this one song. That's it. It's not a huge commitment, brain. It's okay. It's only 3 or 4 minutes because my brain doesn't want to do it before I've started doing it. It doesn't realize how enjoyable it's going to be. It's as if I want to dance. But so we'll just press play on the music and just see what happens. Every time I press play, I'm like, I love that song. That's great. Dance for one song. And then I'm just like, oh, I feel so much better. I feel so uplifted. And I was able to move my body as well. But yeah, finding out what all of these little ways that you can get more dopamine will then you'll be able to schedule out your work day a bit better, your home life a bit better. So you're able to do a bit better of that dopamine management. Like I think that's huge for ADHD is learning how to better manage your dopamine, how to spend it wisely and how to get it back in wise and efficient ways. Because there are other ways that we often get dopamine, like scrolling. That is a dopamine seeking behavior, which isn't all that conducive for our health. I can understand why we're subconsciously doing it because our brain it's a really easy way for us to get dopamine, but it doesn't usually make us feel better in the long term. It can hurt our mental health in other ways, depending on what you're looking at. It's not really helping our physical body because we're not doing much. And a lot of people can get stuck doom scrolling because the brain is like, what an easy source of dopamine. Yep, I'll just stick to this one. But in a dopamine menu, what we do identify with desserts, you can have them sometimes and they're fine, but you don't want to have them all the time. You need a range of meals. You can't just have dessert all the time. And that's helpful for identifying that. It's like, if you want to scroll every once in a while, that's fine. But let's make sure we're including a diverse range of dopamine activities that cater towards all different areas of our health and well-being. It's really helpful to do that. And it'll help us as well if we can understand that this is a dessert as a dopamine seeking behavior and it's not something we want to do a lot of. If we can find ourselves getting stuck doing that, we can also catch ourselves and stop ourselves sooner and be like, oh, I'm doing the thing. I've been scrolling for X amount of time. Okay, what can I do to break myself out of this and transition to something else? We might be able to catch ourselves sooner and be able to recognize that behavior as, oh, my brain must be super low on dopamine right now. What can I do instead of this? Because this is making me feel shit.
Sarah, for someone that is very interested in finding out more about ADHD, and I think you're just a wealth of information, where can they get more information from you?
I would definitely recommend that they follow me on Instagram. It's very important to me that I use my Instagram as a place to be able to share content that's relatable and validating for people and also like empowering education as well. And my thing and my business, what I try to offer is giving people a representation of what it is to be a autistic ADHD woman who is learning to unmask in a way that they're comfortable with themselves. I do everything I can to learn about my brain, and I do everything I can to not shame my brain and find ways to like support myself and empower myself and then share that with others to let them know, hey, you can do it too. We don't have to shame ourselves. We can support ourselves. We can love ourselves. Here's the education you need, and here's the motivation you need, or the inspiration you need to know that you can do it too. You're worthy of love.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know, for myself, I'm always, when I start getting a little frazzled, it's like, okay, Denise, reel it in. Those are my words. Reel it in. What are you
Reel
doing?
it in. What are you doing? That's funny.
How many projects do we really need on the go at one time?
Yeah, my gosh, same. I feel like I've been hearing for the past few weeks, like a past couple months, so many people just kept saying to me, like, you seem really busy, hon. And I'm like, yeah, I really, damn it. Damn it. I'm like, damn it, I'm doing it again. I'm spreading myself too thin, aren't I? And
Yeah.
I'm like, but I get so confused. I'm like, I'm not sure what to cut. What do I let go of here? Like, I enjoy everything that I do. So what's going to give? Because I do need to make that choice and be, okay, I do have to choose, because if I don't choose myself, everything's going to come crashing down and bring me down instead. I need to make the choice of how to pull back. But it's really hard when we're interested and we're excited and we want to share and we want to do all this stuff. It is really tricky having ADHD sometimes, because I feel like we can have so many, like a diverse range of skills and interests and expertise, and we're passionate and we're usually very charismatic and we want to share that and we want to do all these things, but it's like we only have a certain amount of time
And energy.
and energy. Yeah. And it's hard because I don't know about you, but I find that for me, I usually want everything that I'm doing and I'm excited about, I want to share it. Like, I want to share it with other people. But then the more I do that and I'm spreading myself out to everyone else, I don't prioritize myself as much and my me time and the things that make me happy and make me de-stress, because I'm like, oh, but all this stuff is so exciting, I'll just produce all these things. And then I'm like, oh, let's let go of at least one thing so we can focus on ourselves again. Okay.
Yeah. And it's so hard to reel ourselves in. It really is.
It really is. It really is.
So we're going to wrap this up today. So Sarah, what are your final words of wisdom?
My final words of wisdom. I hope anyone who's listening who suspects they have ADHD or they do have ADHD, I hope this can be like a little invitation to them to be open to learning about their brain, how to work with it, and not shame it so much. Because I just feel like that's so common in our society, and especially as women. Even people who do know they have ADHD, they'll often use it as a way to criticize themselves or disempower themselves. Oh, I'll never remember anything because I have ADHD, or I can't do this because I have ADHD. Like, when it's, I get it, I get the struggle, but also it's not the end. It's not that you can't do things. It's that your brain is different and there are different ways that you need support. And we're capable of that. We can do that, but we need to learn about ourselves first and not shame ourselves so much. Like, I hope people can understand and accept themselves a little more. And I hope this can be an invitation for them to do that.
I love that. Thank you so much. And wherever you're watching or listening to this, I will be putting Sarah's information. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out and ask her the questions. So yeah, thank you so much, because ADHD is so common, and it's so nice that we are learning more about it and educating ourselves and not shaming ourselves.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're dispelling the myths and decreasing the stigma and working to understand ourselves and each other better. That's really awesome. And I'm so appreciative that you had me on today to talk about that. I'm very passionate about it. So thank you for letting me share that passion with you and all your listeners.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And leaving you a gentle reminder to slow down and enjoy life. And I'll see you in the next episode.